Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Live. I'm your host, Tony Duty, and I'm pleased to be joining you from my professional home at University of Delaware. We broadcast on the HigherEdLive network. You can tune in to Student Affairs Live Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our guests, but we can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsors that make Student Affairs Live possible. HigherEdLive is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. This broadcast is sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. The ACPA 19 convention team has been working to create a space for ACPA members to connect deeply, connect with purpose, reflect, and enrich learning at ACPA 19 in Boston, Massachusetts. With only 3 months until convention, ACPA would like to encourage you to register and participate in all Boston will have to offer. Dive deeper into content and build stronger relations with colleagues at a pre-convention workshop. Encourage an undergraduate student to participate in NextGen, gain employment advice and coaching in our Career Wellness Center, and center dialogue on racial justice and decolonization during our Race Caucus sessions. ACPA 19 speakers include Francesca Ramsey, Stephen Canals, Romeo Jackson, Laura Wads Munoz, Dashka Slater, and Julie Lithcott-Hames. Register today to join thousands of ACPA members as we become the leaders we've been waiting for. Visit convention.myacpa.org to learn more. I want to take a moment to thank Joe Janice, who's helping to monitor the back channel and forwarding to me your best content and questions from the Twitterverse. Now, a big welcome to my guests, Kathy and Robin. Can I have you each start off by describing your current role and your definition of leadership education in 60 seconds or less? Let's start off with you, Kathy.
All right. Yes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Kathy Guthrie, and I'm an associate professor at Florida State University, where I've been there for 11 years. It's crazy to think that I have been there, situated in the higher ed program. I'm also the director of the Leadership Learning Research Center and the coordinator on the undergraduate certificate in leadership studies. Now, how I define leadership education is really anything that is facilitating leadership learning opportunities, and that is enhancing identity, capacity, and efficacy of folks in the leadership area. And it has to be based on theory and practice for it to be education for me.
Excellent. All right, Robin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Janice. I am the Director for Leadership and Experiential Learning here at Rutgers University. Been here for 5 years. Previous to that, have been at a number of different institutions in a number of different functional areas, all with leadership being kind of the thread that weaves through everything that I do. I've had the opportunity to build from scratch our leadership department here on campus with an incredible team and wonderful students that have been willing to be our pioneers through all of our big ideas. For me, the opportunity to develop 21st century competencies in our students and helping them to realize and make meaning of what those experiences and transferable skills are that will ultimately aid in success, not only on campus, but also in their postgraduate world as well. And I agree, it has to be that link between the literature as well as the practicality of doing the work, which is why I love the experiential learning part of my job too.
Fantastic. All right. So, Robin, how have you seen leadership education shift over the last few decades?
Yeah, I think it's broadening. We are seeing much more of a focus on engaging and empowering the followers, the organization as opposed to traditional management. The more employers are focusing on transferable skills, the more we're seeing an integration with career readiness, with return on investment. We're seeing individualized leadership centers popping up. Maybe they're housed within academic units, within career centers, reporting centrally as well as within a student affairs model. We're not just looking at leadership through a student leader lens anymore. It's really being viewed critically. And so we're taking into consideration cultural competence, civic engagement, communication, psychology, business, right? All of these different concepts are connecting to what leadership is and how we train and educate around it. And demonstrated leadership is really a transferable skill that just transcends any one discipline or industry. Rather, it serves as this bridge that connects content with competence. And so we're seeing more academic realms really interested in it because regardless of what their industry is, they're seeing leadership as that thread. Engineering, STEM fields, they're bringing us in to marry the soft and the hard skills. And so it's an exciting opportunity for us to be partners both within and beyond the classroom.
Nice. All right, Kathy, you have anything to add to that?
I would just add that really when we think about leadership education, it's actually only several decades old, so more than a few, but actually ACPA was the first place in higher education, one of the first places in higher education, actually in 1975, to start talking about leadership education co-curricularly. And Denny Roberts, we love him. He started by working with, they started a Commission 4 in ACPA, and it was a task force. And then it wasn't until 1980 that the first academic-based course was actually provided. So I think it's really interesting when you think that, when you look at the history of higher ed, that it really just started in the mid 70s, early 80s. And so I'd say it's shifted drastically in the decades, but I would echo everything that Robin said in her description of it. But when I think about it, I'm like, gosh, 75, right? That's what, 40 years, 40 some years. So really interesting to think of it that way as well.
Great. All right. So Robin, you said that you've been in this for a few years at Rutgers, and I'm hoping you can talk about the menu and the continuum of leadership opportunities that are available at your program there at Rutgers.
Yeah, of course. And so like I had said, about 5 years ago, we had the opportunity to really develop this area from the ground up. And so what we were finding was that students were coming in with a very one-dimensional understanding of what leadership is. They were assuming that they had to be in the polo holding the clipboard to actually be the leader. And we wanted to really intentionally develop leadership both positionally and non-positionally. So students recognized their responsibility as well as their opportunity to be an influencer, not just because they're holding the authority and the position, but in any shape or from any platform of their life. And so we really cover the spectrum. We do a myriad of things that are all immersive and intentional. We have tiered cohort styled programs that are workshop series. We focus on different times of a college career, from incoming new student all the way through our hashtag adulting series for our transitioning seniors out. We have about 400 to 475 students every year enrolled in those programs. We also created a peer mentorship model. We do campus-wide programming, so Leadership Week and other initiatives such as that. We have a regional conference that we've been doing now for about 6 years that brings in about 575 students every year. We sponsor alternative break trips, and so those service immersion trips, as well as our leadership living learning community that we have designed. We have offsite retreats, so post-orientation and throughout the year retreats where we take students offsite. And then we also do customizable trainings that service students, staff, faculty, and external clients. We do over 130 of those trainings a year, and we customize them for those clients. And then lastly, this positional leadership that we do, we have 110 students that are in these positions, and we do a tremendous amount of work and focus for them. And so we really are on both sides of the spectrum. We're both a playground where students have the opportunity to explore and engage in leadership, as well as a leadership laboratory where we provide opportunities for students to be learning curriculum design and marketing and programming and all these real life skills that really transform into high impact internships for them. So we kind of cover both of our bases there.
I love the terms playground and laboratory and leadership. I'm gonna have to borrow that.
Yeah.
So all in total, how many students do you engage over the course of the year?
In a given year, we're about 8,700 that are involved in one or more of these experiences.
Excellent. So it's really this portfolio approach. It's not one size fits all.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I relative to that concept, I'm always concerned about capacity and affordability. And ideally, I think it'd be great if we could offer every student at the university some kind of leadership experience during their undergraduate years. Do either of you have suggestions on how we could increase capacity, given that we don't have an unlimited budget?
Right, and Robin, those are incredible numbers. I mean, you're right. And I think that one of the places that I often see on campuses that we don't tap into are academic homes, right? So academic, whether it is, a college or very specific student orgs that are focused on academic disciplines, I think that is an opportunity to really expand that, is to go into the colleges. And I know that there's always challenges working with academic, student affairs and academic, but how are we truly integrating this, especially if we want them to use it after they leave the higher ed institution that we're at? And so really, how are we reaching out to our friends and saying, how do we build this? And most of us probably know Corey Seemiller's work, but she spent years looking at competencies across all different types of, fields, and saying these are what we need as, for competencies, and has 60 of them. And so how are we then really pairing all of our work in some of those areas, I think is critical. I also think that the use of digital space is underutilized, and that's sometimes often scary for folks, but how are we building, and I love the idea of a portfolio, but how are we doing that in digital, and maybe some self-guided work, student leader development plans? How are you doing that with student orgs and where there are already spaces they're already situated in, but then having training across campuses where it's not just a specific office or area doing this, leadership educator work, but how are we doing it so that we can say, okay, faculty, you're leadership educators as well. Look at your institutional mission statement. Look at our strategic plan. What is this saying? And so making sure that we're training the trainer as well to really cut it across all campus facets.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, especially with using our academic partners and having folks realize that leadership is everyone's work, and sharing in that load bearing. I think, this is one of the biggest challenges, especially if you're coming from a large institution. How do you scale the opportunities while still maintaining the quality of the experiences? Because leadership development doesn't always happen 500 people at a time. And so, one of the ways that we have found luck doing that is by creating intentional pockets of more intimate settings, but doing more of them. And so, if we have a 200-person workshop series for 8 weeks, instead of saying, all right, we're only going to bring in 25 students for this 8 weeks, we actually do 7 sections of 25 or 30 students. And so we're scaling the opportunity while still maintaining and preserving that learning environment, so that it can be interactive and so that it can be, simulation based. And then the trainer model, I completely agree. How are we using peer mentors to help diffuse some of this leadership and scale the experiences? What about alumni? What about faculty? Are there legacy leaders that can be trained to, be on some kind of an advisory board capacity? What can we do in that regard in utilizing the folks that have already gotten some of the training, and maybe they can broaden that scope, and really then that creates a 2.0 experience for their skill development too, because they're on the other side. They're more in that leadership laboratory now, helping to engage folks in that playground and hit more people than we could ever reach on our own.
Kathy, I think I remember you did some work with Jason Merriweather. You mentioned digital technology. So what does leadership look like in a practical sense in a digital environment?
Right. And the conversation used to be really about online courses. We have well moved beyond past that kind of framework. I think, yes, there's still opportunity, but how are we really engaging? Because when you think about it, leadership is occurring in digital spaces. Some of the biggest movements and we see on campuses happen in digital spaces, whether that's Twitter or other social media platforms. I mean, it is, when you really start digging in, this is really where students are at. And so how are we seeing leadership showing up? There was even a few years ago a conversation around gaming, the big games, and how is that developing leadership skills and behaviors, which it absolutely is. But then how are we getting students to then make meaning of it in those spaces, right? They're like, oh, I'm just playing a game. I'm like, did you realize all the skills that you just developed by getting a group of folks that you've never seen before to do something in this space? And so I think just the Alquist work, I think, is just absolutely brilliant. If you haven't followed her work, she's actually finishing up a book right now, but she has actually some digital leadership pillars that really is focused on how are we engaging and what are the skills needed. She also has a great New Directions for Student Leadership that she co-edited, and it's really focused on digital leadership with Lisa Endersby. And so just encourage people to check that out and thinking through how are we opening up those spaces, or how are we engaging students in those spaces around making meaning of their leadership experience, whether they're using social media as a reflection tool or as a way to actually build the skills and competencies needed.
Love it. All right, so Robin, you mentioned a leadership conference with over 500 people that you got. Can you? I know from having been at Rutgers for a few years that was a model that other schools have tried to emulate. Can you share a little bit about the format and why you think it's been so successful?
Yeah, so this is called our MARC Leadership Conference, and the purpose of the MARC Conference is to inspire our students to action and dispel the myth a little bit that life first starts after graduation. We want students to realize that, in fact, they're living it now, and they have the potential to leave their mark in a number of different ways. So we bring together about 20 speakers, TED-styled speakers every year that have left their mark in really incredible ways, and we span the industries. We've had Laverne Cox, transgender activist. We had Niall DeMarco, a deaf and disability activist who won Dancing with the Stars. We've had educators, Ron Clarking. We had the White House executive pastry chef that worked with Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign. Folks that have done incredible work around human trafficking. We've had CNN heroes. We had a woman that was a world-class snowboarder with a prosthetic leg that had done a tremendous amount of work around 3D printing to actually create her leg, and what she has done for that field as well. So just incredible people that are leaving their mark, and that are just spouting inspiration to our students and making them realize that they have that potential too. And the format, I think, of the conference is successful because it's quick, it's innovative, it aims to inspire, but it also challenges, and it is real. We try to figure out what the pulse is of the year and of the students and of our place in this country and in this world, and we try to highlight it and talk about how students can make a difference through that lens. The initiative is completely student run. It is, in addition to our TED speakers, we provide energizers that create opportunities for genuine and organic connection. We've had a lightsaber competition. We have some that have become staples that the students won't let us get rid of. We have a huge balloon bridge where students look forward every year to bringing the inner kid, inner child out in themselves. And so every year we redo the conference. Everything, with the exception of our balloon bridge, is brand new and different, so that we can keep it fresh and have the energy be palatable. We also have student Ignite speakers, which for their experience, they have the opportunity to tell their story and how they have left their mark also. And so it is pretty rare to allow students to share the stage with some of these remarkable speakers. And so the empowering feeling of the MARC conference for them is the opportunity to get on the stage and tell their story. And we do a lot of work with them around slide design, public speaking, and storytelling. We use Simon Sinek's Start With Why model, and they've been incredible partners in the process for us. And really, we just design the space with an intense intentionality. And so everywhere you go and everywhere you walk, our participants are blanketed by language and imagery that evokes leadership, creativity, and really a call to action for them to figure out what their mark is going to be, so they walk out really feeling ready to do something about it.
Very cool. And I think Joe was on the back channel, was going to throw out a link either to the video or to the website so people can check it out. So I'm going to try something that I've done on a few episodes, because I think you both have some interesting backgrounds and want to change it up here a little bit. I'm going to try and do a speed round, a rapid fire. So I'm going to give you quick ask for your one word, one phrase responses to the following questions, so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better. All right, I'll start. We'll just go Kathy, Robin. We'll just go back and forth. Kathy, you go first. All right, ready?
Oh no.
All right, here we go. Kathy, favorite living role model for leadership?
I went back and forth cliche, but for me, it's Susan Comavez. I am not a formal student of hers, but I'm definitely a student of hers in life. And I just in awe of how she shows up every day in every place.
All right, Robin.
I'm also going to go in this sentimental frame. I'm going to go Joe Briety. He was a mentor and supervisor of mine at the University of Connecticut, taught me always to dig deeper, taught me how to be a practitioner and a practical educator. And to this day is my go-to person that really pushes and challenges me, even for everything, even when it comes to even this conversation today.
Awesome. All right, so favorite deceased role model for leadership? Kathy.
I'm going to say my grandma. My grandma's very progressive and was doing things that in her way that she could to really lead. So while I wish everyone could get to know her and know of her, she was very progressive, and that there's parts of it that I really try to emulate.
Okay, Robin?
Incredible. I tossed back so many different ideas here, and I think I'm gonna go cliche a little bit, but I'm gonna go with Nelson Mandela. I think he was someone that had integrity, and he challenged the status quo, but he had humility and deeply rooted values that I think our world could use a little more of.
Okay. The standard question, favorite leadership theory or model, Kathy?
Hard because I take pieces from all of it, but I would critical. I'm really in this critical leadership pedagogy space, and so I'd say that some of the work that John Dugan's doing and some of the things he's putting out into this world, it's really influencing my thought.
Awesome. Robin?
I went back and forth. I have a couple, but Baxter Magolda, the self-authorship work, I think it's how we do experiential learning, right? It does embody what we do in the vehicle that we express leadership through. And so I always go back to that work. And then also just the Terry Burton cycle of reflection, the what, so what, now what, without reflection and push to application, we're playing games. So we have to really push people to apply it beyond the educational setting.
Okay. All right. Favorite leadership academic book?
I just got done with this book because a friend recommended it to me. It is called Leadership as Practice. And it is an edited book. So I wanted to throw something out into the world. And it's really pushing against our notion of leadership traits and behaviors, but really how do we practice leadership? And so it has, I woke up the other night thinking about this book. So I'm like, it's good when you start waking up thinking and putting connections together. And so that's the book that I wanted to show people because I think it has a cool cover too. I mean, look at that cover. So leadership is practice.
All right, Robin.
I'm going to go with the Student Leadership Competencies Guidebook. Actually, you had mentioned Kathy Corey Seemiller, and so that is one that is always on my bookshelf that I utilize. And then also Shackleton's Way, Leadership Lessons from the Great Antarctic Explorer. I love the practicality of that book. It talks about all these different leadership lessons and then showcases how he, as kind of a forgotten leader, exemplifies them, and then how we in business and in the world can do so also.
Robin, you're such a rebel. I keep asking you for one answer.
I know, I can't.
All right, favorite non-academic leadership book, Kathy?
You can tell I love books, right? So I was grabbing off before we started. So you're more powerful than you think. And it's a citizen's guide to making change happen. And it talks about power dynamics. It talks about how are you working within systems, against systems? How do you make those choices? This also has a really cool cover too. I'm looking at it and there's some but I think it's actually from the founder of Citizen University. And so it's some really, really cool stuff in this book.
All right, Robin?
I'm intrigued. I want to read that one. But I'm going to go with The Originals by Adam Grant. One of the most recent books that I came back excited to just talk about just how interesting and thoughtful it was.
Well, that's fascinating. The former vice president at Rutgers, Greg Blimling, gave me that book to read. A great author.
Good one.
All right, favorite subject in college, Kathy?
So I actually had a minor in leadership. One of the things that started off, but I will not say that, it was actually leadership ethics and values at a liberal arts school that I went to. But I loved, even though I was not a major, I majored in business, was communication. I learned more about communication, nonverbal, all the different sectors of that in college. So I would say that was my favorite subject.
Robin?
I was pre-law, so I have to say,
of course you were.
Of course I was. So I enjoyed it. Me and my highlighter and my law briefs, I could have done this world.
All right, if you weren't an educator, what alternative career would you choose, Kathy?
Oh, I would be, this sounds so strange, but I've actually thought about this. I would love to be like a Martha Stewart. I love to craft. I love to create in spaces, but I would love to open some type of business where it was welcoming of others to just try things out, right? Just let's craft and see what happens. And so I would do Martha Stewart without being Martha Stewart, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you could have a side hustle in Etsy.
I know.
To get started, right?
Right.
All right, Robin.
I am not a crafter, so I will be your first client on your side hustle. If I wasn't an educator, I think I would have gone lawyer. I would have followed it through.
I think you would be a good lawyer. All right, iOS or Android?
iOS.
Android, but we've recently taken the plunge into Google Pixel. I don't know. I'll let you know.
Oh, that's a third alternative. I
guess so.
Right.
I guess. All right. What single quality do you most value in a leader, Kathy?
Growth mindset.
Ooh.
Absolutely, through and through.
You're challenging me to only pick one. This is difficult, but I'm gonna go with follow through. I think where ingenuity and creativity connects the implementation and actually walking the walk is important.
All right, last question, last speed round question. What animal would best represent you?
I would hope a golden retriever, because when a golden retriever walks in, you feel differently, I would say, for most people. I know I do. It makes me happy. I want to play, and that's what I would love for people to see, like that their spirits are lifted and that they would like to, have some fun while, walking through this journey of life. So I would say a golden retriever.
I like it. And the fact that you're entertaining me on the speed round is a good example of that. All right, Robin.
So all the animals, I think you took mine. I was gonna say dog. I would say Aussie Shepherd though. If I had to go a specific dog, Aussie Shepherds smile a lot, and I do as well. If you look at that dog, you can see it smiling. It's adorable. But I think also just from a values perspective of loyalty, that is a big value of mine, and I think there's no better and more loyal animal. Faithfulness, reliability, unconditional love, and just the love of family and the importance of family, and also then the playfulness that we have to approach life is I'm going to go with dog too. You got two of us here.
Yeah.
I know.
All right, so this next question for you, Kathy. A colleague of mine here at University of Delaware, who I think you know, Anthony Middlebrooks, asked me to ask you this question. What can we build in students that will serve them well when facing the unknown challenges of leadership in the future?
I am going to go back to what I said was the single quality, and that's growth mindset. I think how we can help develop this notion of that I'm a lifelong learner, right? Because I could list qualities. I mean, I could go through Corey's 60 competencies, which yes to all of those, right? So I would say yes but I have recently really gotten into Carol Dweck's work with growth mindset. And I think that oftentimes that is missing. And so how do we learn? Because every day context changes. And so we can give them skills that they can then emulate, but how are they able to then look at what is around them in the context or the situation given to them and be an effective leader, and to engage in the process of leadership and to engage in the followers that they need to. And so I think about how can we all, and I say all students, colleagues, friends, I think of this with my friends, have more of a growth mindset. And so that's something that I've really been thinking and reflecting on quite a bit. And how do we do that for students? And especially when we're trying to reach, this leadership for all is more of that piece of the puzzle that I think would really kind of make it come together, so that then when they're 5, 10, 15 years out, that it's this learning mindset, that they're not coming into a space even though they might have been there for 15 years, but they're like, how do I learn about what's happening today, not what happened 10 years ago.
I think it's so much. I agree so much. It's about the humility and the open mind to be willing to learn, and to be willing to learn as partners in the process, and not just this is my goal, this is what I'm doing, and all that matters is the finish line, right? It's more about the journey.
So I love that book. I actually have been in contact to try and get Carol Dweck to appear on an episode. Connected to that concept is the concept of grit, and Angela Lee Duckworth has done some work in that area. Is it possible to teach resilience?
Yeah, and and resilience and grit and growth mindset, all of those are closely related, but they're all slightly different, right? It's all that's pretty technical. But when I think about resilience, it's this whole notion of how do we bounce back when things go awry, right? And there's a great book that has 7 skills that you need to sharpen, for resilience and all of these different pieces. But it is really, how do we first get to know ourselves? Because that's what resilience is about. What are the triggers? What are the things that kind of take us off path? Or something could happen, and how do we react to it? I remember when I was in high school, there was, and this is a random story, that I was in the dentist office and I saw this poster that said something like, 1% in life is what happens to you and 99% is how you react to it. And I remember looking at that thinking, oh my gosh, like that is such a simple thing, but it's not a simple thing, right? But when you think of how you react and internalize, and that really is connected to that resilience piece for me, right? So how I react to something might be completely different than how you react to it. But then how are we then coming together to support each other and not judge, right? Because I think that often happens too, especially in a leadership process. If something happens and your group is fractured because some people are wanting to go through this change and transition and others aren't, and how are we then really working together through it? But that resilience piece is how are we getting to know each other and ourselves? But then how do we even practice, right? So practice the critical thinking, practice this, it's called real-time resilience. Actually, that's one of the skills that they say that you can sharpen is this real time. And so I think through with students, that do we put them into situations? Do we make them slightly uncomfortable? And I say that uncomfortable, but in our programs, they're in a safe space, right? So we are not going to let them completely fall. We're going to catch them. But I think that discomfort can help with that skill building of resilience. And that also, as I mentioned, is connected with growth mindset because then they're in a space of, wow, now I can look at this a little bit different, right? Or, oh, when we have students that say, I never liked public speaking and I still don't, but I'm less nervous. You're on the right track, right? That's where we want to go. You're not going to be self-actualized when you come out of our programs, but how are we moving you along in just, your thought process? And so just really that resilience is really connected with that grit and the growth mindset and so forth.
I think it's also so connected to the experience, like you said. You have to be put in a position to showcase resilience. We can read about it and talk about it, but until they're put in a position to actually have it, and then understanding the language to realize the skill, because how many students are walking out realizing that, oh, what I'm exhibiting right now is resilience. And so are we speaking a common language to make them realize that they are in fact applying this competency?
And I would also say a lot of our students come to us with a lot of resilience. There's all this talk about, oh, students don't have resilience, or we need to help them. I think there are a group of students that we don't honor, that they have already been through a lot. And so how are we helping them, honor themselves and what they've done and how they have navigated, but then also, well, it's not their responsibility to help others, but if that is what a leader does, then how can they help others sharpen those skills as well?
Absolutely.
So, Robin, how do you know you're making a difference? In practical terms, maybe beyond a survey, how do you measure the success of a leadership program?
We see how many of them come back the next day. You talk about resilience. I think
I don't know. I would come back to a carnival the next day.
I think so much of the work that we do, and I really echo Kathy's last point in perspective around what our students are going through and how many balls they're juggling at once. And so, we're told that the more students gain, the more they come back for more. And can they apply it? Can they apply it in an interview? Sometimes, especially with leadership work, we first find out 2 years later that a student's realizing the value of that conversation or of that experience. And maybe it doesn't set immediately. Of course, we do our pre and post tests and we assess in that way. But the true growth we're finding in our students is in the long-term commitment that we're putting into them. We have students that start with us as first-year students and graduate, and then are alumni for 2-3 years, first coming back to talk to us, sit on panels, serve as peer mentors, and really actualize what we spoke about. And they're saying, if it wasn't for this workshop or if it wasn't for that experience, I don't know that I would have figured that out or had this perspective. And maybe they didn't figure it out until they were put in that position where they had to exhibit that skill and call upon it. And so I think it's creating a community of students to have this long-term and this long-standing commitment to their growth and to figuring out what that looks like. How are we engaging our alumni? How are we doing these kinds of surveys, not just with a student immediately after a program, but a year later, to see if they can recall any of the information that we have shared with them. And then, of course, through staff observations, too. It's not just about the student self-reporting, but what can we do to be able to shed some light for the student and say, you might not even realize this, but I see growth mindset in you. I see resilience. I see grit. I see confidence, even though you're telling me that it's something that you want to work on, and this is how I've seen it. And so pointing it out to them and giving them the language to realize that they have this leadership potential in them, and maybe they have a little bit of humility too, and they're not seeing it. And that's, I think, the most fun and rewarding to polish and uncover for our students, to realize that, you know, they have what it takes. They just have to exhibit it.
I say that alumni is critical. We've been doing at Florida State for 8 years. We've been doing alumni where we ask them, what did they learn and how does it apply in their current world, whether that's personal, professional. And it is fascinating because then we can line up or see where our gaps are with our learning outcomes, because that is so important to have, you know, set up these assessment strategies while you're building a program so that it's not an afterthought, which so often I know it can be, because there's a bajillion things you need to do when you're setting up a program. And so seeing where that gap is, it's fascinating. And they say, I can't remember that theory, but this was the concept. It's like, perfect, right? You know the material, even though you don't know the theorist. No one really cares about that. Care about how is it then actually making a difference in your world and in our world, because that's the whole goal, right? Is that we're creating leaders, future leaders, to then make our world better. I know that, you know, I have a 5-year-old, and I know Robin, you have children as well. Like for me, that is why I do this work, is how are we making sure that we're getting leaders out there to then be able to make positive change so that this world is better for the upcoming generations, and, you know, and hopefully our own generation, but for also for upcoming generations. And so that alumni piece is huge. It takes a lot of work, but it is a huge source of really knowing about that assessment piece.
Absolutely. And we talk to students all the time about how they're already ahead of the curve, right? By engaging in this topic. Leadership is not sexy for everyone, right? And so for our students that are engaging in these conversations and these experiences, you're already ahead of the curve. And so how can we help you build that efficacy so that you can spread it to others and make it your own, right? I totally agree. Who cares what the name of the theory is, as long as you can apply it and have it work for you in your world. And so however we keep tabs on that to show it, I think also the use of social media, the use of, you know, multimedia, so that it's not just handwritten evaluations anymore, but how do we create a video that can talk about alumni and show the value of these experiences, so they can put it in their own words, and we can use different methods and platforms to engage other students. You know, we spoke about enhancing scope and broadening reach. Maybe they don't want to hear it from me. Maybe they don't want it from a flyer, but will they respond to this person they remember graduated last year talking about the value of this work and how they have applied it to their own life? Could be a much more powerful platform, and something that we have started to use a lot.
Now, Kathy, I know you've written recently about socially just leadership education. Can you help explain to the audience what it means and why it's important?
Right. Now, I just engaging in social justice work and leadership work, I think, is critical to really for us to think about how are we situating everything at that intersection. So when I say that intersection, it's where the social justice and leadership kind of at that at that point, and how are we moving forward? Because I feel like you can't have true leadership if it's not focused on social justice. And when I say social justice, it's about really thinking about equity and equality, and how are we thinking, you know, yes, race, ethnicity, gender, non-binary, you know, all of these pieces, but ability, disability, all the isms. I really think through that, and how are we really thinking about that so it's culturally relevant, but then also how are we making sure that we can take action? So I think like social justice work, we need to have the leadership so that we can move forward, but you also need leadership to be situated in social justice. That's why it's the socially just leadership. So really, I think about that intersection, and I just think it's critical for our 21st century. I mean, as we move forward, our world is more diverse, our society is more diverse, the United States is more diverse, our college campuses are more diverse. You know, I could just continue to say that. And I think that we often miss some of these opportunities to really be teaching in that intersection. And so isms and a lot more, right?
Right. So Robin, the name of your department is Leadership and Experiential Learning. And I know the phrase experiential learning is quite intentional. What advantages and challenges do you have or might you have compared to traditional academic leadership classes?
Yeah, so I think we're finding now that our students are no longer visual, they're no longer auditory learners. They are experiential learners. They want more hands-on experience. We get told constantly that students want to actually lead. Whatever they mean actually leading, I think we talk about how, reading a cookbook doesn't make you a chef, right? Being in the kitchen makes you a chef. And so learning by doing is one of the best forms of learning. And so the advantages are huge. We have the opportunity to be more interactive. We have the opportunity to be transformative. I have never once sat in front of a room of people and lectured theory, or talked too much into the theoretics behind it. We want to give the students the tools to actually experience it and then process after the fact. And so that in itself is a bit different for our student learners and something that they're really drawn to. And so we find that students are relieved in having these conversations and in doing this work, because it does truly bridge the gap between learning the concepts and the theories with the application of it. And by the nature of our work being so hands-on, it helps us to create a really strong community amongst our students, because they are getting to learn each other. They're getting to have connections that they might not be doing in a traditional academic classroom setting, where they're not engaging as intentionally. And so I think there's a lot of advantages to the work of being more experiential. I think there are some also challenges. Once a student has the experience that we create for them, it's not fresh. We have to design. And so my team and I are constantly trying to recreate curriculum, to do things over, because we do have students that start with us as first years and then go all the way through. And what they value is that they can be in so many different capacities of our office and never get the same experience, never go through the same simulation, never have the same aha lesson from that. And so that's a lot of pressure. That's exhausting from our standpoint as curriculum designers, to constantly recreate the experience so that it can be fresh. I think also from an accountability standpoint, from the practical sense of leadership, for a student that misses an experience or misses a training, it's really hard to recreate that. And so there's no way for a student to make up something that has been missed. And so when you're trying to, cattle 110 students through these experiences and 10 can't come because of class, but how can I make it up? I don't know how you can make it up, because I can't recreate this, 50-person simulation that happened that all resulted in the value of socially just leadership, or the value of inclusion, and why we're not doing that enough, right? It's hard to recreate that experience to be as meaningful and transformative for 5 students as opposed to the 50 that we had worked with. And so that's difficult. I think another difficult thing is that there's a difference in leadership and training, and a lot of folks sometimes don't understand or recognize that difference. And so we're constantly explaining to partners what you're doing is training, and this is how we can infuse some more intentional leadership within that, because there's value to both. We need to operationally train, but there is a difference when you want to expose students to the leadership competencies, and how do we use that correct language. And then lastly, one of the biggest challenges for me for experiential learning is truly relinquishing control. If we're going to be experiential, then we have to trust our students, our grads, our staff with the opportunity to experience something, which means them doing it in a way that perhaps is a little bit different than what we had intended. It truly is a co-requisite sort of experience. And so people are learning it at the same time as they're implementing it. And so we have to be willing to relinquish a little bit of that control, so we are allowing students to take the reins and experience it. But it's important to balance that between, the standard of excellence that you want for your participants, with then, of course, the experience of the student who is learning by doing. And sometimes that can be a little nerve-wracking.
I would, so many things came up as you were talking. And one of this book is talking about, actually leading. It's about how do we practice leading? How do we practice engaging in the process of leadership? And that's what I was like, well, of course, we all want to practice, because it's contextual. It's, as I was saying, it shifts from moment to moment sometimes, moment to moment sometimes. And so this was really, and there's this whole movement about leadership as practice. And so it's right along, because experiential, I've been doing that, for years. But I also think about the leadership learning framework. So some of the work that I did regarding how do people learn and specifically learn leadership, and training is one of them. It is, but it's more of that competency and skills. And so it's great that you have to train a conduct board on their job, right? But how do they, when we push it a little bit further so that they can take those skills and competencies and apply it to their discipline after they leave our institution? And so I think this whole notion of leadership learning, experiential, and the engagement piece, but then how are we also, they're observing. So even when they're in that experiential, I'm thinking of the simulation you were talking about, Robin, like that I know I learn when I'm observing folks interacting, whether that's good or bad, right? We've all had those those times when we're like, oh, I would never want to act that way. Do I act that way? And you have this internal monologue, like you totally are, learning, but then it's how are we reflecting, as Kolb Cycle talks about, how are we reflecting to then make meaning from it? And so I think there are a lot of those unscripted moments, as long as we're making sure, like you said, that students are reflecting and making meaning from it. And so when you were doing that, I wanted to be like the snapping, and I thought, oh, that's distracting, because I think it is so critical. And how are we doing that to reach all? But this book, it opened my eyes to some different ways of doing that. Like Kolb's model is a great foundation, but then how are we actually moving it into different spaces? So
yeah, I'm gonna have to get that one on my bookshelf. That's great.
I know, right?
You really like that book. Can you show it to us one more time?
Well, I have it because it's literally, but it made me think about some things different. That's why I like it so much, because I was like, oh, that challenged me, and I had to read some things like several times to make sure I got all of it. And that's, I think, and just even when the theory and application of it, it's very, and it's outside of the United States, a lot of the authors, which I think is also incredible to push our thinking forward.
Absolutely.
I love it. So Kathy, there's been a lot written recently about the importance of emotionally intelligent leadership. Yeah. Can you explain it to our audience and describe how we might actually infuse that into our curriculum?
Yes, and I'm definitely not the expert in EIL. I honor that and want to say that. And I have all these books, right? Like because my bookshelf, but Marcy Levy Shankman, Scott Allen, and Paige Hubbard-Curran are the folks that are really into this emotionally intelligent leadership. And they came out a couple of years ago with this second edition. And we all know Howard Gardner talked about how we have multiple intelligence, and emotional is one of them. And then, of course, Daniel Goleman took that, the Harvard business professor, that then took that further and saying it's really about leadership. And then, of course, Marcy and friends, I'll say Marcy, Scott, and Paige, then took it into this notion of college students. And so this work has been around for quite a while. And I think it's continually important to think about how are we making sure it's infused into curriculum, this notion of self-awareness and self-management, and how are we emotionally connected? And there's other competencies that you can read in the book, but that how are we really connected with others? Because so often you'll see leaders that might not have that sense, right? Or how are we making sure that we can build up that intelligence so that leaders can be able to engage with their followers and in the process of leadership appropriately. And so I would say, Marcy, Scott, and Paige have some great resources, and they have like a workbook. We have an we have an EIL course at Florida State, so it's in a course setting, but it's incredible for students to come in and talk about emotions and how does it fit into what they're doing in the entrepreneurship school or their discipline. And so I think we do this in some ways, but I think we could do it more intentionally in programs, to be honest, right? Like I think we kind of throw it in there because we know it's important, but I think we could definitely be more intentional about how we're setting up all the different aspects of emotions.
So I want to ask each of you to kind of be forward-looking and make a prediction about where you think leadership is going. What do you think it might look like on college campuses a decade from now? Robin, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think as it is, our students and our families, our employers, we're already talking and looking about graduation rates, and the impact that they're having on students and student debt. College campuses, I think, are going to have to adapt to the style of our students, the changing styles of our students. They'll continue to expect a voice at the table. They're struggling with concerns right now around debt, around return on investment, around food and home insecurity, around mental health, all these different balls that we're juggling for our students, and I think the demands and need of the workforce and the uncertainty of a global market, right, in need of a top talent. And it will be leadership educators that will continue to help students to make meaning of their experiences and apply that knowledge beyond the educational setting. I think there's going to be more integration with career readiness. I think the focus on soft skills will be important, but I think we'll need to also get back to training the face-to-face, where we're seeing this generation of students is lacking a little bit, is in the comfort in face-to-face. I mean, the number of times I have to train my interns to answer a phone and not avoid it and all do one of these when it rings, because they're petrified of it, and they just don't know how to navigate the ambiguity of what is someone going to ask me on the other end of that phone call. And I think we have to lean into what their concerns are and what their shortcomings are, and use that to adapt what we need to teach them. And also just the need to integrate leadership with social justice and continue to do so. I think in a world that is more diverse, a workforce that is becoming more and more global, there is a need to continue to deeply connect communication and digital savviness and cultural awareness to the work that we're doing both in person and online around leadership education.
Wow, I think you just have a whole book with multiple chapters outlined right there.
Easy, right? This is easy stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this is the heavy lifting for sure.
All right, Kathy.
Oh, right. And I think of some of the things that I actually took a few comments as you were writing, because what you said about retention, I think that we're now starting to see how involvement in leadership, development programs, I'll say like leadership education as a whole, that is connected to retention. And we're starting to see it at Florida State specifically with specific identity groups, identity-based courses around leadership. And so how are we doing better about keeping numbers on that, right? Because in a world where we need to make sure we're, having that conversation, I think that would be something that I'm trying to add on to all the great stuff you said, because literally, yes. And the other thing that I wrote down that made me think of was you had talked about the soft skills. I was at the Leadership Educators Institute the last few days, the National Clearinghouse of Leadership Programs, as well as ACP and NASPA. The three organizations come together and do this every other year. And I know, Robin, you're a frequent attendee of that. And there was a session where we were talking about soft skills and the need for us to talk about it. And someone goes, we've stopped using soft skills on our campus. We actually call them super cognitive skills.
Oh.
And it has been fascinating how faculty and other folks really take to that more so than soft skills. And when we started thinking about, well, gosh, it is super cognitive. And so it's interesting how even our language, I think that is going to be shifting as we try to think through all the things that you said, Robin, right? So how are we shifting our language to then make sure that it's connecting and aligning? The other thing that I would say, I'm engaged in a research project. I'm looking at over 1,500 schools, institutions in the United States that have some type of leadership program. I'm looking at the mission statement of the leadership program, and then I'm looking at the mission statement of the institution, because it's when you start looking at institutional mission statements, how often that they say that they're building or developing global leaders. It might not say that in that exact term, but there are ways that leadership, the process of leadership or leader change agents, that is showing up in institutional mission statements. And so I think you're going to start seeing more of higher ed reclaiming that need for leadership development. I think that, a lot of our early history in higher ed in the United States really was based on building leaders, whether that was religious leaders or lawyers. I mean, there was a lot of these in the very beginning, and we've started looking at some different reasons and why we exist in higher education. And I think we're going to start reclaiming that more, whether that's because of retention, whether that's because of what corporate or job skills and what is needed in that space, whether that is, we could ... But I think going back to those institutional mission statements, which I go down these rabbit holes, and it's fascinating to me because I say, okay, so what is your institutional mission statement? And then what is the program mission statement? And then hopefully later on down the line, I can even look at, if an institution is saying that they're developing leaders, how are they supporting financially and other ways these leadership development programs in co-curricular and curricular spaces on their campus? Because it's an interesting conversation, right? Is leadership value added, or is it critical to institutional missions and to what we should be doing in higher ed? And so there's campuses that they're told, no, it's value added. And then there are campuses that say, no, this is critical to our mission and our strategic plan. And so sometimes that language really needs to be aligned. So in all of that, I would say, just going back to the question, Tony, sorry, but in how we are going to be making sure our language and what yet language we use is going to be really interesting in the development of what we're doing.
Oh, I can't wait to when are you gonna be able to wrap all that in a bundle?
Ooh, yes, I'm in deep right now, so it'll be a little bit.
No, but I think that that's fascinating, and so much about the language. I so agree with you, especially when it comes to faculty and making faculty understand and realize the critical nature of this work, and that it's not fluff. And you had said language, and you triggered my memory of a conversation that I've been having a lot here on campus, which is the conversation around skills versus competencies. And what we're finding is that a lot of our academic partners don't respond to the word skills or the concept of skills. And if you think about it and read about it, a competency is more overarching, right? It is more of that umbrella, and it's more than just the knowledge or the skills. It's the application of those skills, which is everything that we're here talking about. And so, the ability to communicate effectively is a competence that may draw on individual skills that a student or a person has that lead to effective communication. And so how we even change that slight difference around using the language around competencies, I think helps our partners see that it is more of a critical piece of our everyday learning and not something that is extra. I think the other thing, Tony, is acknowledging what our students need, and I'm thinking of even our students of color, and some of our students that leadership is not their necessary go-to, right? Like we have students that are, like I had said, juggling a lot of different things, and maybe they're focusing on the job, maybe they're focusing on different aspects of their identity development, and how can we make leadership more inclusive so it's not something that is reaped in privilege that you have the opportunity to do and engage in, but it is something that is more part of the college education, right? It is something that is open to all students, and they see it as a value that is needed no matter who they are, their identity, and what field they want to go into, as opposed to the extra that is added on when they have time.
That identity piece is so critical. I know that I didn't have the leader identity until well into college, until someone literally said to me, Kathy, you are a leader. And I come from a very rural, poverty area, like poverty stricken area, where leaders were the folks that gave things to me, right?
Yeah.
And so that identity development, saying, no, yes, everyone can be a leader. And I'll never forget when I had a conversation with a student recently and said, have you ever tried to get your friends to go figure out where to eat? Right? Like, that's leadership.
Absolutely.
That is the hardest thing for me. When I have my group of friends and I'm like, where do you want to go eat? And everyone's like, I don't know. And I'm like, oh my gosh, right? Like sometimes but that is part of that practicing, right? That my obsession with leadership is practice. But how are we getting students and even our friends to understand and realize, wow, I am practicing that. So I have these abilities that when it really comes to where it's something bigger and it might have change or positive change, that I've already done it just in a different context. And so I think you absolutely, but that identity piece, if we don't believe we're a leader, then we're not going to build our capacity or able to really think about our efficacy if we don't. That's the first step, is that
Right.
identity piece. So yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
And helping them to realize that they have leadership, even if they don't feel or identify as a leader.
Yeah.
Destigmatizing the word is something that we've also been looking into. Absolutely.
Yeah, especially when it's such a Western word,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
How are we even using different words in that language piece? Collaboration, so, community, family, and how are we even saying, no, that is a huge source of learning about leadership, is
Right.
watching family or how you're working with your siblings, and, you could go on, but absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So we are winding down the last few minutes of our time here, and I want to be respectful of your time. Can you finish off by sharing some additional resources, maybe websites, videos, conferences, or even tips that might help viewers continue to explore the conversation around leadership? I'll let Kathy go first, because Robin.
Yeah, well, I will say, so there is this book, The Role of Leadership Educators, Transforming Learning. And in this book, and yes, I have the book in front of me, but in chapter 3, it's actually all about resources. And so I just direct people there because we have a lot of professional associations specifically focused on leadership, like the Association of Leadership Educators, International Leadership Association, the National Clearinghouse of Leadership Programs. And then we also have student affairs focused associations that, ACPA, of course, NASPA, we have institutes, workshops. When I just mentioned the Leadership Educators Institute, there's also one called the Leadership Educators Academy through the International Leadership Association. There's Lead 365. There's a lot of opportunities that are starting to pop up just because there was a lack for so long. And how are we preparing professionals to be leadership educators? And so I think being able to be in that space to have those conversations about curriculum and even defining leadership, what does that mean? And I would also say there are a ton of academic journals. You can type in leadership focused journals, of course, and a ton will come up. But a couple of them that I will just shout out is New Directions for Student Leadership, and that has been around just for a few years. The Journal of Leadership Education, the Journal of Leadership Studies, Leadership Quarterly. And so, but that chapter in the role of leadership educators has a great list. It's not exhaustive because we keep adding, but I think it's a good place to start, especially when you don't know when to start. Because one time I did a search for leadership on Amazon, and it was literally 700,000 books came up, and I'm like, okay, what is academic focused and what is someone just saying that they were a leader of a corporation for a year? So now they're going to tell you about their leadership experience, which is great for that context, but maybe not for mine. So I could go on about resources forever, but I will not.
Well, we can collect some of those resources and put them up on the episode archive, so folks can grab them. All right.
Yeah. I mean, those were great. That is certainly a wonderful list, and I'm going to have to borrow some of those books also. I think, I would echo LEI, the Leadership Educators Institute. I think institutes are incredible because they're an opportunity to really dig a little bit deeper and connect personal with professional. The Women's Leadership Institute, I know from personal experience, that was a really gratifying and transformational professional development opportunity for me. I know the National Leadership Symposium runs an experience every summer where they dive into a critical issue around leadership and is a much more intimate environment. And so in addition to the NASPA and ACPA and ACUI and all the other associations that we have, these are some more intimate and focused opportunities to dive in on a specific topic. I think also just the opportunity to engage in conversations like this. I mean, we have leadership educators that are incredible around this country that are doing such amazing work at their home institutions, and having more opportunities to talk and connect resources, connect ideas, connect practices is something that I think can really help all of us broaden and further this discipline and this field, because it is ever changing. What it was 10 years ago, what it is now, and what it will be tomorrow is different. So how can we partner up in kind of moving that forward?
Well, I love it. Thank you to both of you, Kathy and Robin, for sharing your time today. I certainly learned a lot, lots of great resources. I have to go buy that book that you keep putting up in front of us. And as always, thanks again to our program sponsors. I'll actually be back next week with an episode featuring the former hosts Ed Cabellon and Heather Shea as they reflect back on and share some stories about their learning from hosting and kind of make some predictions for what they think the future of our field might be. You can receive reminders about this and other great shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can also browse the archives at HigherEdLive.com, where you can find a recording of this episode, or subscribe to our iTunes podcast. I'm Tony Duty. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you make it a great week, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.